This is a blink and you'll miss it kind of story, and not because the video is short, but because the subject is very, very small. Not to mention, difficult to capture on video. This little one is the Hawaiian Yellow Faced Bee, and it is Hawaii's only native bee. When the topic of pollinators comes up, people usually think of the European honeybee. That cute little lady that might sting you, but is really just trying to get her job done. You think of bee pollen and a supply of delicious honey that is all kept in a nice, neat hive. The Hawaiian Yellow Faced Bee is nothing like its distant cousin, which you see over my shoulder here. And unless you're from Hawaii, you've probably never heard of it. It has also made its way onto the endangered species list as of 2016, courtesy of invasive species like ants, plants, and humans.
Aloha, my name is Kimio Nakane. I'm the Director of Community Outreach with a local nonprofit that focuses on environmental stewardship called 808 Cleanups. We're here at the Kaloko Inlet, or the Kaloko section of the Ka'iwi coastline on the east side of Oahu. Back in 2015, 808 Cleanups began the work out here to restore the coastline due to misuse from pallet bonfires. Since then, we've become educated about the impacts that those pallet bonfires have had on this local environment, as well as the native yellow-faced bee. 808 cleanup volunteers have been working to remove invasive halekoa and kiawe from this area. What that does is it frees up our native nayo species. Now, as you may know, invasive species tend to grow a lot faster than our native species, which at some point will choke out these native plants from existing. A lot of the work that started out there continues to happen. We're removing a lot of the invasives, giving that native coastal area an opportunity to spread backwards, continuing to work out this way towards the inland. In 2017, a group of nonprofit organizations that support this effort came together to purchase the last 2 parcels of land upland from where we are today, preserving it for our future generations. These plants play a critical role in the preservation of this space for our native bee, as well as for the environment as a whole. This is our popolo and our alena. Our work has been focused on removing invasive halekoa, kiawe, and bringing back our native naupaka kahakai. So while we're working with these yellow-faced bees trying to preserve their environment and expand it, we often find ourselves in close proximity with other insects like wasps, centipedes, and scorpions. The irony in all of this is that I'm severely allergic to them. And so while we're trying to work to preserve a species, we're also got to be conscious of our health and our safety.
Aloha mai, my name is Kekai Mar, and I'm a Park Interpretive Program Specialist for the Division of State Parks. The native species that we have as far as vegetation go that naturally occur are, as you can see, a lot of the naupaka bush. You know, this indigenous plant could be found in many other areas, but plays a vital role in really helping to establish kind of the first colony or the pioneer plants for coastal areas. And once naupaka establishes, other natives will follow as well. One of the main native insects or invertebrate that we have in our coastal shorelines in Hawaii is the yellow-faced bee, or the Haleus anthracinus. You know, some more commonly known or had named this bee as Nalo meli maoli. So Nalo is to fly, or Hawaiians reference it as an insect with 2 wings. Meli is honey, and maoli is native or indigenous to this area. So that whole name is kind of a nickname, if you will, for this yellow-faced bee that we have. And you know, this little critter is no larger than a grain of rice and is so vital for these native coastal ecosystems. It's the main pollinator for all of the coastline. You know, today if we look around at the insects that are on these coastal plants, only about 5% are native species, are the yellow-faced bee. And scientists have found there's around 63 species of that yellow-faced bee in Hawaii. And as of 2016, 7 of those were claimed as endangered species. So, you know, this species had come a long way of evolving symbiotic relationships with a lot of these plants. You know, they help to pollinate it. In return, the plants are establishing food, but also habitat. They establish homes.
The coastal variety of the yellow-faced bee is most threatened by habitat loss. You may not be actively thinking about it, but it's plain to see. Between overdevelopment by humans, invasive plants, and climate change, the yellow-faced bee is inching closer to extinction. As a solitary bee, there's no central nest or hive, but a colony made up of the territory they live in and the holes in which they lay their eggs. If you're curious as to why it's important to support native pollinators and native plants, watch the yellow-faced bee interacting with the naupaka flowers. When the bee enters the flower, you'll notice one simple detail. The size of the bee matches the size of the flower perfectly. It can enter in ways a big, clumsy European honeybee can't.
So the female yellow-faced bee chooses to nest in an alpaca, especially the dry branches that you might see sticking out here. They get really hollow in the center, and the female will find her way into one of these and nest in the very back of these branches. And she secretes this filament that she creates as a compartment for each larva. And as she places them, she seals them off. So once these larvae hatch, they'll kind of in a way eat their way out into the habitat here. In addition to the nesting in the branching of the naupaka or heliotrope tree, the yellow-faced bee chooses to nest in the coral rubble that we have here. So a lot of the holes that you might find in the coral might be ideal sites for the yellow-faced bee, and you can kind of see them flying around here, but they also nest in this coral rubble. You can see them going in. So it's important to know while we're here on the beach, not to create or disturb any of the rocks, but create any bonfire rings or moving the rocks or even coral rubble. Unfortunately, that can disturb and set back a lot of the research, a lot of the progress that researchers had done to help this species really recover. And so there's some ways to benefit this place. We ask that folks leave the coral rubble, stay on trails, and avoid from disturbing it in any way.
Non-native and invasive species can be disruptive at best and devastating at worst, bringing disease and increased competition. The loss of a single species is tragic in its own right. I probably run the risk of upsetting scientists by oversimplifying this, but the bottom line is, ecosystems run at peak efficiency when all the players are native.